one technical side. So that's basically the split I'm going to make, and this is the quadrant I'm going to use. And some of these will pop up in the left and right buttons, so I have to explain them that you can see them. And I'll go too quick with my finger. How do I get well? I don't know if this is an automatic thing. There doesn't seem to be a way back, but lots of standards, and IEC 62443 is probably the biggest standard and the most ambitious standard in process control of all. You have ISO 27000, which is much more on the corporate network, the office network type of systems. Where IEC 62443 or ISA 99, which is basically the same thing with some small differences, yeah, it's different. And there are a number of standards, and they all provide somehow they're in automatic where they shouldn't be in automatic. But there is this 62443 4S2, which is a standard which is typically specifying the requirements for control equipment. So there is underlying the ETSA certification, which is the certification that vendors of controllers, vendors of PLCs and other equipment need to have to prove that their equipment is secure. So that's tested and look both at how robust it is against various types of attack, but also how well the development processes in these companies are focusing on cybersecurity. So it's basically the two things. Then there is, we've kind of lost them because it started automatically, but there is here a 2-2 and a 3-3 that are kind of the technical and the non-technical specifications. So there are specifications that are specifying on what kind of security requirements there are for your plant to be secure against particular type of attackers. One is the technical side, that's the 3.3 spec, and the 2.2 is the non-technical side. These are important because these help us really secure the system. Then, keeps on popping up, but then there is the 2.1 spec, somewhere in all these bubbles, which is showing you a framework on how to organize cybersecurity, what things you have to think about, which process you have to implement to be secure. And then there are lots of others. If you look, there are 13 other specs. There are some I pay a little bit more attention to in a later slide. There is, for example, the 2.3 spec, which you see somewhere here in the middle, maybe still a little bit. That's a spec about patching. There's a separate spec about security patching. And what does that spec do, or standard do? It tells you the role of the vendor in standard, in patching. It tells you the role of the owner in the patching. But more important for me, it's still a draft spec. It's not issued yet, but they're still working on it. But the most important initiative in that standard, I would say, is they are trying to standardize the communication around patching. If you look at reality in the world, if you have a Honeywell system, Honeywell communicates the patch status in a particular way to you. After a couple of days, Microsoft has issued its patches. We publish if it's yes or no compatible to our systems, which releases, and we do that in our way. If you look at Schneider, they will do it in their way. If you look at Yokogawa, they have a different way. So all of us have different ways of doing that, and if you have multiple systems, you have a lot of work on matching that all and implementing that all. And in this 2-3 spec, you'll find a way where they have specified an XML environment where you kind of standardize that, so that in future maybe if all the vendors would follow that standard, it's much easier communicated which patches are compatible with which systems and which patches do apply, yes or no. Then there is somehow even without me coming near to that thing, it is moving. But then there is a 2.4 spec. I'll talk about that separately. That's a spec that is just recently finished. That is now kind of being printed. It should have been ready end of February, but that's not yet the case. Now, they say now it's end of March that they will produce it. But it has passed all the approvals, and that is a specification specifically if you provide services as a vendor or as a consultant or contractor, if you provide services to an end user, what type of requirements are there? That is the issue of the 2.4. The 2.4, that's the one here. It's rather new. And then lots of other standards. Our standards, if you would work in the power industry, you would have the NERC-CIP, which is typical American, North America, I would say, Canada, North America. But still very influential in many other countries in the world where they follow the spec. You have, well, I live in Europe, and I work in Europe, and even though we have a European Union, every country has its own specifications, its own standards. So lots of standards. If I say 40 plus standards, well, that's not really true. There are probably more than 100 standards. And even that, it might be underestimating it. But very other important standards for you to consider, IEC 508, 61508 and 511, they are standards for safety systems. But they do address very small areas in that standard. You really have to look for it. But they do address how you combine safety and control systems, which is very important. If you consider that if an attacker would attack your control system, he can do pretty bad things to your production process if you would have full control. But hopefully there is a safety system which is independent from the control system that can stop certain activities. So if you have insufficiently separated those two systems, control and safety, then you can have a problem. And some areas, if you look at transmitter requirements, it's in the 508. If you look at segmentation of these systems, it's in 511 standard. So these are important. The other ones in the bottom, I mentioned them. I'll not explain them in detail. There's one very interesting one I might mention. If you look at IEC 62443, they have categorized kind of the levels of security by assigning 4 security levels. So level 1, 2, 3, 4, and the highest level that provides you the highest security. ANSI, this is the French variation, so the double S. The American organization is the single S. ANSI, the French organization, has also created a classification system. They basically have 3 classes, A, B, C, which are more or less matched. The A class matches with security level 2, and the B with 3, and the C with 4, and they skipped, say, the security level 1. And they have similar system, also a very good standard, very influential if you work in Europe in the critical infrastructure. But similar thought as the IEC 62443. What did they bring, all these standards? Well, that's where my technical heart and the question marks come in. I have a little bit of problem, but that's basically me as a technician, that there are so many standards. Meaning that company A wants to follow IEC 62443, company B wants to follow ANSI, company C wants to follow VGB. So lots of different standards, and if you really look at the standards, then maybe 5%, 10% differs, but the rest is all the same. So there seems to be that we, with all of us, have put a lot of effort in copying things. And of course, standards improve. So later standards are generally better than older standards because people have learned. And you see that some standards are becoming old, not realizing that systems are becoming virtual nowadays, not realizing the influence of wireless networks. So you see a lot of gaps in standards, that they not always provide you with the last and best solution for everything. So that is a little bit the issue. Basically, of course, because standards take a long time to create and it takes a long time to update. So 5 years is already a significant achievement. And technology, of course, goes a lot faster. And systems go a lot faster. A bit annoying that is going, I can't go back somehow. Okay. Because I had one other remark. There was a standard you didn't see there because of all these automatic things going over the line. But there are standards specifically on request for proposals. We're describing procurement language, describing how you can specify security. And that's a very important thing also in security. It's not only important to specify your system in technical things so that you get a secure system, but the moment you send a request for proposal for a new system to a vendor, it's very important that you communicate your requirements very clearly. And there are standards for that. And that is really a struggle sometimes, because if you do not do that, in general, vendors will always go for the lowest bid, so you do not always get the security you want. And if you specify it clearly, and those standards help you with that, then, well, it helps you getting a better end result. If you look at the standards, which are more on the vendor supplier side, well, you see less question marks. Because first of all, I think ISA Secure, the ETSA part, which was the 4.1 and the 4.2 spec, they really do a good job, because they help us test equipment, they help us improve our development processes, and you can qualify, certify yourself as a vendor, so you can more easily say, okay, this is what I have done, this is what has been tested, so my controller is yes or no secure. So that it's important to see when you purchase equipment if these tests have been run and if companies have passed that. The 2.4 is quite a new specification. It's not really new in the sense that there was an older spec from the WIB, which is the originator of that specification. And what that specification is doing, I'll come to that in a later slide, but it is giving vendors particular levels of performance in their projects and in their service delivery. So I think that's also a good contribution, because it controls the quality of the end result. This is a slide on the ETSA, on the ISA secure testing. You can see that there are several tests, several levels, and that basically it depends a little bit on how many requirements you may have to meet, how well your security is. Most systems today are still in the level 1 testing environment. Level 2 was only recently added, and in the list of published systems there is a very small list at this moment at level 2 certified. But this means that your system has been tested. Specifically, if you look at the older Achilles testing, which was the type of standard we used before the ISA Secure, that was more or less only focus on the robustness testing of the interface, so attacking it and seeing if it would withstand all kind of nasty traffic. Where nowadays, they also look inside the company. They look if you do threat modeling during your development process, so if you have security in place in the whole development cycle of your product. Then there is this new standard, the 2-4. I say there February 2015, that's when I made the slides, and that's also the moment they told me, well, we are finished, it's being printed, and it should be ready end of the month, but it wasn't ready end of the month, so those things go generally slower than people hope. But at least the content is ready, and the documents are ready, so it's more a printing job, formatting job, which has been done. It's based upon a WIB 2.0 specification, which is originated in Western Europe, primarily in the Netherlands, but also adopted by the UK, by the Namur organization in Germany. And what it tries to do, it tries to establish a particular quality level in service delivery. So if a vendor is installing a system at your site or is servicing a system at your site, certain security activities have to be done. And it specifies those activities. But it goes also a little bit further sometimes, and that's a little bit because it comes from a totally different angle. It was kind of dropped in by the WIB in this process, so it does not align with all the other specifications. Sometimes there are some contradictory things in it, but it's one of the few standards in IEC 62443 which actually talks about safety systems. So if you talk about some activities or some requirements around safety, you find that in the same spec. How does this work? Well, you have all these requirements, and the whole idea is, and you can do that on this URL I show you there, the www.wib.nl, and then the other part were a kind of a self-assessment tool. So as a vendor, you can log into there and you can start answering questions, and in the end, you're told which level you have. And they have 3 levels: base level, silver, gold level. In the old spec, it was bronze, silver, gold, and well, some of our customers require certain levels. They say, okay, I only do business with you when you're bronze level, base level, or I only do business with you when you're silver level. So that is kind of the idea behind this standard. Then there has been some analysis on standards. That's basically the final part I want to briefly address. And this slide is the outcome of research from a Swedish group of researchers. They looked at ICS standards, and they analyzed in the standards where they focused on. Well, if you look at this, you see there is a lot of focus on technology, and there is very little focus on organizational stuff of this part. If you compare that to the ISO 27000, the same results, and you see remarkable differences. That ISO, of course, everyone who has studied ISO knows it has a very strong organizational focus. You see that also in this area. Where ICS standards at this moment still suffer is everything non-technical. They have indications, but they do not have the methodologies. They do not have everything specified. The 2.2 standard from IEC is, well, still in draft, or already a long time in draft. So what it more than, if you start adding up all these standards, and you start estimating a little bit how much man hours there are in a standard, then you get more than 1,000 man years of work in there. lots and lots of different standards. What did they bring? Well, I think they still need to mature, because some of them are old, some of them are, well, not providing exactly what we need at this moment. They're not aligned with real problems. There are too many standards. There's a lot of overlap. I already mentioned that. So if you work in this business, well, I counted on my iPad more than 80 standard documents. So yeah, it's a lot of things, and there's a lot of redundancy in it. So yeah, I think we have made big steps, but I really doubt, but then from a technical point of view, as a technician, if we are already there. I think the standards still have to really improve on many ways to make them more readable, also more understandable. If I would give you the IEC 62443 3.3 standard, which is one of the better standards, you would have a real hard time to interpret it and to translate it into something that would be used for your system. Okay, that was my final slide.
Do we have any questions for Sinclair? Any questions out there? Don't be shy. No, they might come to speak to you later. Any questions going once? No? We can get a microphone out there to you. Thank you, Sinclair. Can I get a big hand of applause, please, to Sinclair? Thank you for joining us today. Okay, up next for our fifth keynote speaker for the day. Let me tell you a little bit about him. His subject that he'll be discussing is hacking the human OS. He's an active member of the information security industry through involvement with numerous initiatives to improve the awareness and application of security in business and society. He's the VP CTO for McAfee right here in the region. Let's give him a very big warm welcome as he comes to the stage. Raj Samani. Here you go. Let's give it a go.
So 387. Those are the total number of new malware samples that we see every single day. Well, maybe not every day, but every hour. No, not quite. We see 387 new malware samples every single minute. That's 6 every second. And that's growing, by the way. And one of the things that we have to ask ourselves is why? Like why this clicker isn't working. There we go. And actually, over the last 2 years, we've done a lot of research to try to understand what's the real drivers behind the growth in cybercrime. Think about it. Every single day that you pick up what I would say newspaper, but every time you click onto Twitter, you see another company being breached. So we've done a lot of research over the last two years, beginning with Cybercrime Exposed. And that first paper began to ask the question, why are we seeing such an increase in the number of attacks? And the reality is today, conducting a cybercrime attack requires no technical skills at all. Really, nothing. I give this presentation where I'd say, can your mother and father become cyber criminals? Seriously, can your mum and dad become cyber criminals? And many people will say, no, listen, that's impossible. And by the time we finish talking about the research that we've done, we quickly realize that literally anybody can now conduct an attack. And so that was the first white paper. And it talked about this concept of hacking as a service. Now, I'm a special advisor at the European Cybercrime Centre, part of Europol, and we had the head of the European Cybercrime Centre actually write a foreword where he talks about this very concept. In fact, last year, Europol's Internet Organised Crime Threat Assessment talks about hacking as a service as one of the key motivating drivers behind cybercrime. Just think about it for a second. Any single person across this world can make more money by conducting cybercrime from their bedroom than anywhere else, than having to physically go out and conduct an attack. Robbing banks today is done with a USB stick and not a gun. And that's what we uncovered in Cybercrime Exposed. But of course, that was just the first part. The other part is how do you get paid? Because you remember how Al Capone got caught? Was they followed the money. Now with the advent of virtual currencies and cryptocurrencies, it becomes very difficult to do that. That was the second paper, and then the final paper that we published was called Jackpot, and that was the use of online gaming for money laundering purposes. Now, these three papers I thought was the end. I said, you know, that's it. We've uncovered the attack, getting paid and getting away with it. However, one of the questions that we asked was, why? Why are these attacks so successful? And I think in part, they all have one thing in common. Now, nearly every single breach that you've read about all had one single thing in common. So let's start at the top, Operation Shady Rat. Now, when we actually gained control of one of the command and control systems of one of the criminal networks, we had a look at all of the raw data, and we said, what makes these victims the same? In other words, can we see any commonality between the victims? And the reality was we couldn't. It was an example of a cybercrime group available for hire. When we worked with CSIS, a DC think tank, we interviewed a senior intelligence official from Europe, and he said there are 20 to 30 cybercrime groups with nation-state offensive capability, and they are available for hire. And that's what we saw with Shady Rat. Now, Ayman will remember when we uncovered Night Dragon, those were targeted attacks against the oil and gas sector. In fact, it's the first time I met Ayman, and I said, look, we can sit and talk about other things, but I need to let you know of a major attack that we've seen against the energy industry, specifically oil and gas. And Night Dragon was attacks against the IT infrastructure, so it was looking to steal business confidential information. Again, though, that was different to Shady Rat because it was a different type of attack. And then, of course, we recently did work with the FBI on the takedown of Game Over's use in CryptoLocker, and that was a consumer-based attack. So those were my computer, our families, friends, those were consumer systems that were compromised. And then the last one that we have up is Operation Dragonfly. And Operation Dragonfly was using HAVEX to basically go after SCADA systems and extract, again, confidential information. Now, all four of these attacks, and actually all of the attacks that we've seen, all attack different people, different organizations. Sorry, next slide. And what they have, one thing they have in common, though, is they all target an employee or a user or somebody into some sort of action. Now, this is not the presentation we had earlier. The presentation you had earlier was talking about the human factors, but specifically how humans are not doing the basic things correctly, like passwords and so forth. This is about manipulating people to do what you want. The theory of influence. How do I get you to do anything that I want to? It's simple. I use influence. I attack the subconscious. And the usual answer would be to use security awareness. Go next slide, please. And security awareness is the single answer for every single human-faced problem that we have. In fact, we've heard it today. Think about it. If we have a malware problem, antivirus and whitelisting and HIPs and all of these various different products and solutions we can have, if you have a human problem, it's just awareness. I'm going to tell you right now, awareness doesn't work. It does not work at all. I know it's a bold statement, but I'll give you an example. In West Point, under Project Carronade, they put all of their cadets through 4 hours of security awareness training. And the next morning, they sent everybody a phishing email. Said, do you wish to download your grades? Please click here. From a fake kernel. How many people do you think clicked on that? There was a lot, by the way. 90%. That's after 4 hours of training from military cadets. Awareness by itself doesn't work. Awareness has to be combined with other factors, which we'll talk about just in a moment. So let's have a look at what social engineering is. And I've heard it mentioned a few times, so I think it'd be useful to try to define what we're talking about. Now, when we talk about cyber-based attacks, what we're talking about are hunting attacks. What I mean by a hunting attack is a single interaction. If I send you an email, if I send you a direct message, if I have a conversation with you, that is a hunting attack. Single interaction. The majority of cyber attacks that we see today from the major companies that have been breached are all leveraging hunting-based attacks. The longer-term attack, which is more difficult to detect, are the farming attacks. It's where you've got an insider or a mole that's been basically recruited for some time. Now, all of these attacks follow 4 distinct phases: research, hook, play, and exit. Research is easy. I can basically go out and do research on you, and it's very simple because my targets have put all their information on social media networks. Now, if I want to, I can outsource the research, and we uncovered that in the first paper. Just so you know, I can download 50,000 email addresses of Q80 citizens for about £5. That's how much it costs me. So I can easily outsource that. The hook we're going to get into in a minute. The play is where I extract the information or get you to click on something, and then we have the exit. So let's have a look at the compliance tendencies. Now, these compliance tendencies are based around a psychologist by the name of Cialdini, and he came across 6 subconscious levers that can be used to influence people. And we see these today in the types of emails that you get in your inbox. The first one is authority. If I get you to believe that I'm entitled to the data, then you're going to comply. That's why people in uniforms, that's why we listen to people in uniforms. That's why when you get an email pretending to be from your bank or your auction, that's why people click on them. It's authority. The next one is liking. And we don't necessarily see liking in hunting-based attacks too much, but anybody that saw the film Catch Me If You Can, that was the film with Leonardo DiCaprio on Frank Abagnale, he uses liking. You remember Bernie Madoff, the guy that behind the Ponzi scheme? He used liking. And we're seeing people use liking now by building up their own social media profiles. What they're doing is they're using techniques to be endorsed, or they're using various different techniques to basically come across as a liked person by your friends. We then have reciprocation, and reciprocation is where you feel obligated to do a favor. Now, you see this in LinkedIn today. Anybody that writes your recommendation, you have that sense of obligation to write one back. And even the Hare Krishna movement actually used reciprocation as a means to boost their money back about 30 years ago. And we see reciprocation being used in social media. We see reciprocation being used on Twitter and on LinkedIn and other various different groups. It's used as a vehicle to basically build your credibility. I won't do consistency, but social validation's a nice one. And Kevin Mitnick, everybody that probably has heard of Kevin Mitnick, is a well-renowned hacker, black hat, former black hat, I should add. He would use social validation a lot. He would basically phone up your department, let's say your HR department, and I'd say, hey, I spoke to somebody in your department earlier, they're on holiday now, and they gave me the password. I'm calling from IT. And people generally feel safer if somebody else has done something. Safety in numbers. I always remember this scene from Men in Black, where Tommy Lee Jones turns to Will Smith and says, a person is clever, but people are stupid and irrational and scared. Social validation. And then finally, scarcity. And scarcity is if you think something's going to run out, you're more likely to comply. We see these techniques being used a lot with sofa companies and retail stores closing down sales. But the reality is we're seeing these techniques now being used in phishing emails. Can I get next slide, please? Now, here's an example, and I've had to change the logos because the company wasn't happy, but here's a typical email that you would likely see. And this typical email here, as you can see, uses authority. Because you see, you've got the Royal Bank. In fact, if you look at number 1, customer service or customer security, the email address appears to come from the bank. So what they're doing, now I know it's very easy to turn around and say, oh, well, the user should have known or the user shouldn't have done something. But they're using subconscious techniques. They're using authority. Now, you may not be able to see this because the chairs are in the way, but number 9 says, renew your security details immediately, click onto this link. And if you don't click on this link, we're going to disable your account. Just as a, I want to see how, has anybody actually received any emails similar to that, telling you, listen, yeah. And it gets scary, right? Because you receive that email and you think, I can't access my bank account. I can't access my auction account. I was at the UN last year, and when I was flying into New York, this lady next to me was talking to me, and she said, what do you do for a living? And I told her. And she said, oh, you know, I just got an email from my bank. Just before I left, actually, I managed to get on the wireless, and I managed to sort it out. And I said, well, what was the problem? And she said, well, my bank had just told me that my account had expired. I said, right, what did you do? Well, I clicked on the link and I gave him my internet login banking details. Now what do you do? Now, of course, my memory's terrible, so I had a decision to make. Do I tell her now, just as we've taken off, or do I tell her as we're landing? Because the likelihood is the money's been stolen from her account. But she believed authority and scarcity, and subsequently she gave up access to her account. Okay, next slide, please. So